Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Develop Brighton, and welcome to the Evolve part of Develop Brighton. Great to see a load of familiar faces here. We've got a packed 3 days of sessions, kind of over 100 or so speakers, and I'm sure it's bound to be a lot of fun. Hopefully the weather's going to stay good for us as well. Just a couple of quick things before I introduce our opening speaker. If you haven't already downloaded the app, please do so, Develop 2016. Give you information, ongoing information about what's happening at the event. And you can also rate all the talks via that as well. Information about things like the networking drinks, which everybody's invited to this evening, taking place in the main hotel bar, courtesy of Unreal Engine. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Anna Sweet, who is Head of Developer Strategy at Oculus. Over to you, Anna. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Anna Sweet. We also have Callum and Aaron from the Oculus team here as well, so we're anxious to talk to all of you about building for VR over the next couple days. So I work at Oculus leading our developer relations efforts and collaborating with tons of super talented game developers around the world as they create their first VR projects. So today I'm going to talk to you about what we've seen in the first few years and the lessons that we've seen emerging. But to frame this, I want to start with a bit of history. Throughout our industry's growth, there have been a few major technology shifts that have shaped the way we think about telling stories. Each was inspiring and presented us with new options and opportunities. So let's go back to the beginning, at a game called Zork. From the moment computers entered our lives, they've inspired us to create, tell, and experience new types of stories. One simple sentence, "There's a small mailbox here," inspired a generation of adventurers to open mailboxes, head east, and fight Grus. This was the first moment of PC gaming, and it's amazing to think that a simple text-based parser not only kicked off an entire industry, but was so significant in its own right that we regularly see reference to it popping up in books, TVs, movies, and music almost 40 years later. So what was it that made Zork so impactful? It was the ability to interact, to actually be a part of the story, to have an experience that would actually take shape around you. Around the same time, with the launch of Pong, we all got a brand new machine, one that could take over our entire TV screen. It let us move digital paddles back and forth with 2 basic sliders. Again, it seems simple, but a small advancement in input gave us new ways to interact with an experience and had everyone playing games with their friends. That jump into the living room took off, and new, more advanced machines arrived on the scene. Atari enabled tons of games with varied input: the joystick, the wheel, the combos of buttons, and we all began to build our library. We collected a variety of games, all of them across new and varied genres, and each of them told stories in new and amazing ways. So I admit that most of the stories so far happened before I was born. I didn't become a gamer until the 80s. By then, we'd done some early experimentation with input, we'd learned some things about the stories we could tell and the experiences we could build, and by the time I was lucky enough to start playing games, game developers were really putting their creative and technical skills to work. So I was a PC gamer as a child. I won't mention that my mom wouldn't let me have an NES because no one would ever pay me to play video games. She's probably not going to watch this anyway. But anyone who was a PC gamer in the 80s can relate to the amazing experience of watching game developers continually push the limits of hardware to tell the most immersive and interactive stories possible. For those of you who weren't alive in the 80s, this is the King's Quest series. Roberta Williams and the team at Sierra Games released a game in this series about every 2 years between 1983 and 1998. I remember rushing to the store with my dad each time a new game came out. It wasn't just because I needed to find out what came next in the saga of Graham and Rosella, but because the next game was sure to offer new, cutting-edge features that took advantage of everything my computer was capable of. Increases in pixels led the character to have facial features instead of one pink block for a head. We moved from text input to directing things with a mouse, and ultimately there was a shift from a 2D world to a 3D one. Each new game in the series felt more immersive and told its story in a brand new way. But it wasn't just graphics and input that changed during this time. Something huge was also developing, something called the internet. And with the internet came more big changes in games. For me, the internet really collided with games with the launch of Ultima Online. I remember trying to explain to my parents why we needed a second phone line in the house so I could talk to my friends, while I was also online fighting dragons with them. I also remember trying to convince them it was perfectly normal for a teenage girl to be dating a boy she met in a video game who just happened to live in a different country. While this all sounded crazy to my dad, I bet if I asked you right now to raise your hand if you'd met a lifelong friend through a game, there'd be an awful lot of hands in the air. Whether your game experience was Ultima Online or World of Warcraft, Quake, Counter-Strike, or League of Legends, we've all seen the connective power of playing games together. This type of game development wasn't limited to PCs and consoles either. The same innovative magic happened to us on mobile. We started with our clumsy BlackBerries, trying to play break-a-brick with that awkward wheel. We crammed our fingers onto the number pads to play games like Snake. Eventually, we all got iPhones, we learned about touchscreens, and we began to enjoy throwing birds through the air at pigs. And now, on the way in this morning, I walked into at least 4 people while trying to catch a Pokemon. Every time a new technology has presented itself, our industry has risen to the challenge of pushing its limits to tell stories and create magic in new and exciting ways. Now we have that moment again. This is the year that consumer VR shipped, and with it our industry is once again presented with a new medium, a new way to tell our stories and create our magic. VR is the next big platform. Like PC, console, and mobile before it, it comes with new inputs, new challenges to solve, and new ranks of developers to solve them. So with VR, one of the first big initial shifts in thinking is how usage patterns will differ. Because of the nature of putting on a headset and immersing yourself in a new world, the usage will be more dedicated time and less interstitial time killing. And I think this will be the case even as headsets get smaller and smaller over the years. If you think about it, the implications for that are massive. The rules for hardware and game format no longer apply. Both mobile and tethered experiences can offer something truly immersive and compelling. The capacity to create full worlds and place your players there is now just as readily available on your phone as it is on your PC. Both are asking players to take a step into a rich experience of your design and to spend time there. And that's because with VR, you're really there. Not just with your eyes, but with your whole body. And that means storytelling and interactions all have to change. This guy, Matt Pat, is in a dark and moody Chicago, where magicians battle for supremacy. This is a deeply compelling world, with a complex spellcasting system. To envelop Matt Pat in this world, the developers had to figure out what gestures and animation look like on the opposing magician, how to create an urban environment for magical duels that factors in movement and teleportation, how to create a UI that appears on each hand, how to actually live stream this, and the list goes on. It wasn't long ago that this kind of experience sounded like something we all hoped would be real in the future. But Insomniac has already created this incredible game and solved numerous problems that no one else has had to solve before, all while creating a PvP spellcasting dueler, a genre that has just been born. Thousands of developers like Insomniac have already created beautiful, amazing VR experiences. But in terms of where we are in the curve, we're at the Pong stage of VR's history. Everything about VR is so different, from performance to UI to movement to menus. Everyone is basically starting from scratch. Every developer jumping into VR is on the same level as everyone else. Every single innovation that has happened in gaming since Pong, along with ones we can't even conceive of yet, are waiting to happen in VR. And much like the original mainstays of Pong and Snake, the early movers in VR have the chance to be wildly successful and define a brand new medium. So I say it's time to throw away all the rules. Everything we know about games and movies before is now ready to be rewritten. Because when you're in VR, you're really there, not just with your eyes, but with your whole body. And this means that storytelling and game and app interactions all have to change. But that's the exciting part. That means we all get to go back to our crazy old ideas, our scrap prototypes that were set aside because the language didn't yet exist to create the experience we wanted, and see how those experiences can now work in VR. In just a few short years, we've seen storytelling and VR and interaction in VR change dramatically. When we released developer-focused hardware like the DK1 and DK2, early developers mainly built tech demos and relatively lightweight experiences. But this past spring, when Oculus launched Rift to consumers, developers were ready to begin focusing on shipping full-length games and experiences to a brand new audience. Those developers took lessons from the early DK1 and DK2 days and applied them to create deeper, consumer-ready products. And through that process of shipping games and experiences to consumers, we're all learning together. For instance, on the Oculus side, we're seeing that one of our top sellers is a climbing simulator. 360 video is a huge hit on mobile, and everyone is hungry to try things that are social. With each launch on the platform, we learn something new and surprising. So let's look at a few of the first games and experiences we've launched. At first glance, some of these titles feel like genres that have come before. One of the first titles we showed on Rift was Lucky's Tale by the team at Playful. For all of us who grew up with Mario, we feel immediate nostalgia for this genre. But I can honestly say that before I tried this game, I was skeptical that this genre made sense or would work in VR. But the minute you put on the headset, you're a believer. Being able to look around the world, being able to lean in and look at Lucky and have him look back at you, these are the moments that take you out of the platformer genre and into a whole new experience. But it's not just about feeling like you're in the world with Lucky. Being in the world also presents you with new and unexpected game design mechanics. Suddenly, you're hiding those gold coins in a truly 360 world. You're luring the player in deeper by hiding the coins behind a tree. And you won't find them by pressing a button to move Lucky. The player has to lean in, to engage with the world, to actually peer behind the tree themselves. This is what makes it a new experience in a game. At the Oculus office, we're currently addicted to a game called Blaze Rush. Every Friday around 4 p.m., someone will stand up and say, "I think it's time." And without fail, we all get up from our desks and our email, and we head into our playtesting lab. Sometimes we even convince Callum, all the way in the UK, to head home from the pub to join us. It's gotten easier now that he has a kid. What should probably be a quick game turns into several uproarious rounds of racing and always work-appropriate smack talking. So what's the magic of Blaze Rush that lures us in each week? It's an interesting effect that we've seen a few times in VR now, and that really seems to resonate with gamers. We call it the diorama effect. It creates that feeling of being a kid, of sitting down and playing with toys. Even the most jaded gamer can't help but smile as they go back to a simpler time. The diorama effect is an interesting tool that I encourage you all to think about. As you're building your world, remember the joy we all had playing with Legos, Lincoln Logs, doll houses, army men, and toy trains, and try to recapture that magic. At the opposite end of the spectrum, let's talk about first-person shooters. Not too long ago, we all believed that first-person shooters were the only thing that would work in VR. Then we all decided that first-person shooters would never work in VR. In under a year, we've come full circle and now have amazing developers like Tripwire building games like Killing Floor Incursion that are going to scare the pants off all of us. In first-person shooters, there are interesting challenges to solve like locomotion. But I think it's not the challenges, but the opportunities that are the most exciting. For the first time, game developers get to take advantage of an entire 360 world and a player's entire body to create a frantic, fast-paced experience. Dodging means more, cover means more, And who hasn't always wanted to do a cool hand-to-hand gun flip while taking out a zombie? That's something you can't do with a controller. And it's not just game developers that are at the forefront of VR. Storytellers of all types in film and animation are joining the journey as well. And like game developers, they're going to have to reinvent games and they're going to have to reinvent genres in VR and will inevitably create entirely new ones. At Oculus, our Story Studio team has spent their entire careers transporting audiences through visual storytelling, and now they're being asked to approach it in VR. And with that comes far-reaching creative implications. Helping the audience to feel like they're actually somewhere else is obvious, and is the easy part. The real challenge is storytelling. Storytelling as a craft has been in a state of evolution as long as we have. Cave paintings, campfires, stage plays, opera, books, movies, and yes, games. But VR creates an entirely new set of opportunities and creative constraints. We believe our environments, characters, and situations should be better suited for virtual reality than they would be anywhere else, but that is easier said than done. We're used to telling a story on a fixed-size screen in front of our audience. Telling a story in 360 involves not only building that world, it also means never knowing where the audience will look. It means needing a variable pace that allows the audience to soak in the richness of the world while not missing key plot points. It means coming up with new tricks to draw their attention. These are just some of the first challenges the team tackled. Whoa, we lost our presentation. That's not good. All right, hold on one second. All right. So those are some of the first challenges the team tackled when building a story about a lonesome but lovable hedgehog. While animation in VR may seem somewhat expected, given the robust 3D worlds we've experienced since the first Toy Story movie, I was in no way prepared for how VR could augment the storytelling of a documentary. Notes on Blindness is both a documentary film and a VR experience based on the life of John Hull, professor of religious education at the University of Birmingham. During the course of his career, he became blind and recorded his observations on the subject and published them in his novels. The movie and the VR experience detail what Oliver Sacks characterized as an account of how not only the outer eye, but the inner eye gradually vanishes with blindness. One might not expect a VR experience to help you truly understand the experience of blindness, but let's explore it for a minute. I found the VR experience to be both awe-inspiring and terrifying at the same time. Oh, we've lost our sound. So I will give you the commentary since we've lost our sound. The interesting thing about this experience is that all of these points of light are actually sounds, and it's how he describes the world and how it appears and disappears just based on the things you can hear around them. So if you haven't tried this experience on Gear VR, I highly recommend it. So lest you think the medium only lends itself to narrative storytelling, we're also starting to see traditional television programming, like talk shows, make their way to VR. So let's talk about The Foo Show. It's a talk show about VR in VR. And it's a concept that came about because of a VR demo. Chris Journey, who heads up our Rift developer relations team, was demoing Toybox to Will Smith of the Tested podcast series. He was so impressed by his demo that he went out and funded his own VR tech startup. His tech mixes human avatars with environments from within 3D engines to produce an incredible piece of programming that injects him and his guests inside a game. In the debut episode, Will interviews the creators of the game's Firewatch Tower from within the game's Firewatch Tower. That is something that can only happen in VR. And speaking of things that can only happen in VR, let's hop back to games for a minute, because we're already starting to see new genres emerge that have never existed before. I like to tell this story about my friends at Alchemy. We were planning on demoing their game at our press event at GDC, and my PR team came running up to me because they had a problem. They had made these info sheets for the press, and one of the fields that needed to be filled out was genre. Everybody on the PR team had played Job Simulator, but still no one knew what to write in the field. So I called Alex at Alchemy to discuss. After a brief debate, we filled out the form. Title, Job Simulator. Genre, Job Simulator. While it makes for a good story, it's actually the truth. Job Simulator is a game that only exists because VR exists. This isn't a game that could exist on any other platform. Earlier I mentioned that one of our top games on the platform is The Climb by Crytek. Now I suppose you could describe this as a sports game, but I believe it's much more than that. For those of you who haven't tried it, you are a rock climber trying to scale some of the most beautiful and terrifying rock formations around the world. And you feel like you're really there. Your palms get sweaty, and you feel a bit of panic as you think about making the next big leap. We use this game as one of our demos at retail because people immediately connect to the experience. We even had a woman in a wheelchair who had limited use of her arms and hands try it. Her reaction was incredible. We let her do something that she literally could never have done. And I'm certain we've never had a sports game do that before. I often get asked what has surprised me the most in VR so far. My answer is always emphatically social. For those in this room who have tried a social or multiplayer experience in VR, my guess is that you'll agree with me that the level of human connection that VR provides is an order of magnitude beyond anything we've had before. Last September at Oculus Connect, we showcased a demo that we call Toybox. Now there's nothing particularly special about Toybox. In fact, it's very simple. Two people are in a virtual room together, each represented by a generic blue head and set of hands, with a set of blocks and simple toys to play with. The setup at the show had two strangers connecting from rooms at either end of the hall, so they never saw the person who would be in the demo with them. A developer named Oleg starts his demo, and he's greeted in the virtual room by a generic blue head and set of hands. He first notices something is wrong because the person has their hands up by their face and is clearly struggling with the headset. Oleg says, "Are you okay?" and gets the response, "Yes, I'm fine. I'm just trying to center my headset." And they share a moment of connection between them. Over the course of the rest of the demo, which takes about 10 minutes, Oleg learns that his demo partner's name is Alice, and they have a great time playing around with all the gadgets in their demo. The demo ends, and they go their separate ways. That night, after the show, Oleg is at the bar, and he sees a girl enter and walk across the room. As she approaches the bar, he looks at her and says, "Alice?" And she responds, "Oleg?" Now, I'll remind you that these are two people who have never seen each other in real life before. They've only shared 10 minutes together in a virtual room where they were represented by a generic blue head and set of hands. But that's the amazing thing about social VR. There's so much humanity in the way you move, the way you talk, the way you interact with the world, virtual or otherwise, that you can truly get to know someone as if they were really standing next to you. When we take this new level of human connection and layer that on top of all the new genres we're building, it's hard to imagine the types of powerful experiences that will soon become possible. I've been working in games for 10 years and switched to VR just over 2 years ago. Since I switched, the vast majority of that time has been spent talking with game developers and helping them explore this new medium. In many ways, game developers are an obvious audience to convince to try VR. For many of us, this is an opportunity we've been dreaming about for literally decades. And now that true presence is technologically feasible, developing is an obvious choice with the right support. As we've discussed today, the field for games in VR is wide open. Over the next few years, we're going to see old genres reinvented and entirely new genres emerge. So I know that while looking at the landscape today and all the exciting things we've talked about, you may all think that games are the only things that matter in VR. But we all know intuitively that that isn't true. In fact, we're already beginning to see the start of this. Whether it's something as meaningful as helping students improve the learning process in classrooms around the world, or as awe-inspiring as helping prepare future astronauts for the realities of space travel, or as exhilarating as taking millions of people all around the world to their first music concert, or as life-changing as helping surgeons diagnose and explore the brain. Each of these things are areas people have already begun to explore through the use of VR. So while we spent most of today talking about games, the reality is that games are only the beginning. But game developers will be here throughout. Entire industries will be changed, and new ones will be built, and creating these interactive and immersive experiences requires the skills that only you possess. So I'll leave you with one last thought from what I've seen working in VR the last couple of years. Take a look around you, because the people in this room may very well change the world. Thanks. So I think we're going to open it up for a couple questions. Aaron and Callum are going to join me. I can't see you all because those lights are very bright. Any questions?
Mine's a bit of a technical question. Why did you choose to use panels rather than mirror arrays for the Rift?
None of us are on the engineering
Whoops.
side. You have all the content and business folk up here, so we're probably not best suited to answer that question. But I'm happy to connect with you after and get you to some of our engineers.
Thanks.
I know.
Thank you. Hi, guys. I wanted to ask about the demographics of players that you've seen experiencing the Oculus, because I've noticed a bit of a bias with developers and players towards men. Have you noticed that as well?
So we don't have a ton of demographic information on the customers themselves. What we mostly look at is actually what people are playing, and it does seem to be very wide. On the Rift, it tends to be more game-focused. Aaron works on gear specifically, and that's a lot broader.
Yeah.
So I think it depends a little bit on the platform, and I think generally we see people trying games and experiences across a lot of different genres. People are just really, really hungry for really good content.
Okay, cool. So you think it'll have broad appeal?
For
Okay.
sure.
I think about the type of content as well. A lot of developers ask me, what should I build for? What are people playing? You know, is it shooting? Is it racing? And it actually doesn't matter. We had a discussion the other day about someone who wanted to build like a pony game, and they were worried that it skewed on normal PC toward a very specific market. But within VR, we just find that everybody wants to experience and play everything. So whether that's about who plays it or the type it is, I think it's kind of being mixed up anyway. And on the dev side, at Oculus, we do a lot to try and work with people from different backgrounds and different genders and things like that. So, you know, we're doing all we can on that side as well.
Anything else?
Hi, I was wondering what you think the potential for mixing live action video and interactivity is, so having real actors and potentially real locations, but you know, it could be real actors and CGI locations.
Yeah, so on mobile, there's a lot of live action, sort of 360, both stereo and mono content that's being filmed right now, right? So that's an obvious starting point. There are some interesting photogrammetry solutions and other types of sort of volumetric capture technologies that are starting now to at least be seen. There are some companies starting up to do that kind of stuff. So I think the Foo Show probably is one of your more immediate examples of something that's not necessarily video or photo as we traditionally think about it, but starts to digitize the person in a volumetric way that might be really interesting. It's really early, so we're just looking at the early signs right now, but it's definitely going to be something that's more and more interesting, particularly as it ties into social. Yeah.
Hi guys. So we've seen VR go batshit crazy the last couple of years. Loads and loads of kind of new titles coming out. Where do you personally think we're going to be in a couple of years' time? Where would you like to be in a couple of years' time with VR?
So I'm really excited about social. Like, I think the more the more experiences we build, getting people together, whether that's to play games or just to talk or to work together, I think social is one of the most powerful experiences in VR right now. So I'm really excited to see what developers try in that space over the next couple of years.
I think it's what we've seen on the Gear VR certainly is a huge market adoption, perhaps more than we thought that would happen 3 years ago. And as you say, things got a bit crazy. I think we'll see that continue across the PC and across console. Like if we talk about 2 years from now, there'll be multiple good, high-quality headsets and platforms out there. So for me, it's about having a ton of people to be able to sell all sorts of different types of content. Right now, we're still in that kind of early adopter, smaller stage, even on Gear, which is, I think we said it had over 1 million monthly actives. Like that's compared to, iPhone and things, it's still relatively small. So over the next 2 years, we'll see that explode, and that's what I'm looking forward to, is the true market adoption.
The exciting thing is the content really is what's going to help drive this industry forward, right? Like, if you rewind a couple of years, there was a stage at Oculus where we were telling people not to build anything that was longer than maybe 10 or 15 minutes because we weren't sure that the platform would support someone having a comfortable experience that long, right? But we're far beyond that, where there's not a deterrent to someone being able to put a headset on for 3 hours if they wanted to. But the content has to really help people be motivated and excited about doing that, right? At an alternative of holding a handheld in their hand or something along those lines. So content really is the most exciting opportunity, I think, for VR, because that's what's going to get people into it and make them stay.
And touching on what you said there, Callum, about install bases and things like that, it's not going to be that kind of question, don't worry. It's a tricky thing to convince people about the VR experience without them actually experiencing themselves, because it's such a different kind of thing, right? But in my experience, generally, as soon as someone has put a headset on, they are pretty much sold on the whole experience. But it's difficult to get people into a situation where they can do that. I mean, what are your plans for enabling like the general public to get their hands on headsets? And what would your advice be to developers to try and where do they go to try and get their games in people's hands? And is Gear VR kind of on-ramp for the larger Oculus business in that sense?
So to the first question of how do we get people into headsets in the US right now, there's a few locations where you can go and try it in Best Buy and things like that. Obviously, we'll grow that and end up elsewhere as well. The second question was where the developers go to.
Oh yeah, what advice would you give developers in order to get their games into people's hands if they don't have access to something like the stands in Best Buy?
Trade shows is certainly early on in development. From their own efforts, trade shows and things are good for getting early feedback and how the consumers try things like EGX and things in the UK. We also have a pretty strong marketing team who are doing common things for games like that as well. You'll see a lot more of that over this year, and really kind of moving away from just like marketing the Rift to marketing the games that are going to be on the Rift. And as Aaron said, like it's all about content, and all the hardware companies will be slowly moving towards the content rather than talking about the hardware. Like you'll notice we're not talking the deep specs of what the hardware is built because people they get it now. So we'll help developers do a lot of that for the strong game as well. And then the question about Gear.
I think Gear is certainly a lower cost entry point for people that have their first experience in VR. But even I would back up a little bit and say even beyond the ways that we can help with distribution and demos and retail point of sale stuff, the thing that's really going to help you get exposure of your content to the end users is making something that's genuinely great for VR that can't be experienced in a different way. And we see that right now as we look at our content stores and see what gets repetitive use. They're those sort of hallmark experiences that people, when they have friends over, they're like, oh, you don't know what VR is? Well, it's this. Or they have their list of 5 things, right? And so as you're approaching an opportunity in VR, that should be a part of your mental check process is this going to be something that people are like, oh, I get it. This is why it's different. This is why it's better in VR. If you can check that box off, then I think that your content is going to do itself. In the same way that like Notes on Blindness is a totally different way to think about documentaries. It's just something that becomes newsworthy by virtue of the fact that it's so different and so unique, so desirable.
Just to add to that though, I I don't think developers should focus just on that one checkbox, which is, you know, showing people are like, hey, this is great. Like a lot of what we've been seeing from what's selling well on Gear and Rift in the games category at least, is like what has that deep base of game design and mechanics, and you know, it's a game that's full and deep, because we've kind of moved past the 2 years ago of Oculus Share with kind of little demos, and you know, certainly people who own a Rift or own a Gear now are used to VR and they get it, and now they're looking for those experiences which they want to come back to and carry on doing things and get better at, rather than just kind of experience for one time. So I think if you can match both of those, then you're on to a winner for sure.
Okay, I think it's me. Your game, The Climb, is excellent. I must admit, I really enjoyed that. But it reminds me that we don't have hand controllers yet. When do you think these are going to be available for the Rift?
We haven't announced a date for it yet. It'll be the second half of this year.
Second half. Okay.
All right. First of all, great talk. Second, you've all three of you are in the thick of VR, and you're all talking about content. What I'd like to know is, each of you, if you've got something that's been a way out experience. I mean, a lot of the stuff in there have been how do we transition from the console into VR? How do we blaze new trails? But with you guys seeing a lot of the stuff that's coming in new and exciting, has there been anything that's really jumped out at you as a wow moment or a WTF moment or whatever you want to say, like an experience that you have genuinely, like that Notes on Blindness, I'm really interested in like breaking genres and genre mashups and things like that, but I'm just curious what you've seen that's out there.
One of my favorite experiences I did at a game jam in Copenhagen a couple of years ago. This isn't something we could really ship or sell or anything. It was just something they put together. And basically you sat down at this physical dinner table, and 6 of you have to sit down at the same time. And you put these DK2s on. And what you were watching was a 180-degree filmed video from your perspective. So it was 6 different characters. You had the mother, the father, the boyfriend, the son, and so on and so forth. And each of you was a different one of those characters, and the world matched exactly what you felt. So although you were watching a recorded video, when your character picked up a glass, like you were encouraged to do the same, so it seemed very similar. And the experience itself wasn't that great. I mean, it was 180, the frame rate was really low, but what was interesting is at the end of it, we'd all experienced slightly different things from different perspectives, so they filmed it 6 different times. So whilst I was the mother, and I felt like the father was like piling my plate full of food, and that's what I saw in the video, and yet the father only saw like 2 carrots and things. So it was more than just the experience itself, it was the discussion we had after, which I think lasted like an hour. And I think for me it was like completely different to anything else I'd ever tried, and it enabled us to have that conversation after about what we thought and what our feelings were and what emotions we had. And for me that was one of the best things, because it wasn't just like me in a moment enjoying something, it was afterwards and what we were able to talk about.
So we announced not too long ago our VR for Good program, which is a program we're doing to connect documentary filmmakers, kind of introduce them to building for 360 video and connect them with nonprofits to build experiences. And I think for me, one of the things that I'm most interested in is the way in which VR drives empathy, I think in a much stronger way than any other medium. For instance, a bunch of the documentary films that the team at Verse are within have done are, I think, really powerful and new ways to tell stories and news and happenings around the world in a way that makes you feel a lot more, I think, connected to those experiences than if you were just watching it on a flat screen. So I'm interested to really see where those kind of experiences go, because I think the empathy in VR is really powerful.
Yeah, for me, like if I had to pick just one experience, if you really forced me to do it, I would probably say it was the Toy Box, the first time I did Toy Box, because it was the first time I did really good hand track controllers plus social. But that's kind of an unfair example maybe. I think that the message I would say is that I've seen lots of nuggets and things that are really interesting from tons of different experiences, whether it's like the visual breadcrumb trail as you're navigating a space to help the player be grounded, to the empathy. The first time I cried in an experience was Clouds Over Cedra by the Within team, which is a totally different thing, to one of the games from our game jam, which is called Alone, where you were in a VR experience playing a virtual video game on a virtual screen, and then all these like haunting horror type things happen around you. So for me, it's like little pieces all over the place, more than one thing that's just like, oh, well, that's what it is. And I guess the point is there's a lot to explore and discover still. It's still very early, so we're just as excited as you guys.
All right, I think we're out of time. Thank you all for having us. We'll be around for most of the week. At least these guys will.
Super important.
Yes.
Callum and I are bearing gifts this week.
Yes.
So if you need help, hardware help, to get into VR or to keep your project going or bring more people onto your project, let us know. We want to help out. Thanks.
All right.